myself to
Can you hear me now? Don't tell me I said all that and nothing was heard. Because that would be annoying. That would be annoying. Did you hear any of it, Kelly girl? Okay, so I'll just go through it again. Um, hold on a second. Okay, so real quick, hold on a second. Let me just answer this. Um, I know that a lot of you may not find this fascinating, right? But for anybody that doesn't know, um, the if anybody's seen the program on Netflix, right? I went to a school very similar than that, right? I did an interview. Oh, great. I did an interview last night with a producer who is going to do a documentary on the boarding school, and it went really well. I was late because as I was going through the deposition to like there's specific things that I wanted to make sure that I touched on. As I was doing that, I noticed the victim's name was visible. I understand that it's public information. I understand that all of this stuff is public record, but for me, I choose to leave the victims out of it, right? On top of that, what makes this interesting is the attorney for the victim is also a student, right? So she also, it's the dynamic in the deposition is pretty interesting, right? Because staff chooses to lie. Staff doesn't normally recognize the abuse, which in here he kind of acknowledges the abuse, but he also he justifies it, right? So that's why I am kind of fascinated with this case because of the attorney representing the victim. Also, I know that this case specifically, this deposition was done in February of this year. Jane Cheripko, who is the deposition that's with him, he passed away on June 3rd, right? So unfortunately, he will never answer for the crimes that he committed against children. I absolutely need to give a trigger warning. There will be mentions of child abuse, child neglect, and sexual assault. This specific case is, the victim who was sexually assaulted. The defendants are Merle Manley, Dr. Vogel, Emmanuel, hi, my crazy life, Emmanuel Argyros, who is the son of the owners who took over like the day-to-day operations, Jane Cheripko, who is this deposition is with, Dawn Pozamato, Curtis Newsom, and Education Plus Corp doing business as the Family Foundation School, right? So there's been several cases that have been, there's still a couple open. There's been several that they did settle. Public is not, if it's not for public consumption, you really won't hear me talk about it, right? Especially if it's something that's open, like the criminal case with Paul Gear. There's some redacted information in here, but I think I do want to try to leave the victims out as much as I can, right? I do think that I'm really excited about the documentary, and I didn't see the program, so I don't. How can I word this? I don't typically watch things like that because it is super triggering. But I'm excited that I'm going to put. Hold on one second, y'all. I want to put a trigger warning ticker. Don't mind my Don't mind my photo. It's from another live and I forgot to change it. But I do want to make sure that when people come in, because I'm all over the place these days with what I post and what I talk about, I do want to make sure that people understand that this is something very different. And I don't want to trigger anyone. I don't want to, make anybody that's not my intention here, right? Like, my intention is always going to be to speak for the people who are no longer here, and the ones that need justice, right? And I understand that. Hold on a second. Why isn't it letting me? Bear with me, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm not good at this, y'all. Like, I'm not good at this. Okay, so I think that it's important for people to understand that it's not something that I was always comfortable discussing either, right? Like, and because I am all over the place as far as content goes these days, I really don't want anybody to come in expecting it to be about internet drama and then be triggered, right? That's never my intention. I'd rather, if somebody couldn't handle the subject matter, just don't watch this one, right? I understand that it's heavy. I get that many different people have many different traumas, but I understand, like, this is something that I have an inside perspective of, right? Like, yeah, the troubled teen industry is very much still alive and well, right? But it's not every day. Like, I was talking my crazy life. I was actually talking to the producer about the staff member and how she has this whole anti-community. And I said that, there were people questioning about her about it for years, right? Like, and it was always, oh, we're just spoiled brats, or it was a college prep school. No, ma'am. Also, in this deposition, I did come across some things regarding the interview that Hammer did, where the guy said that he didn't, he doesn't believe that people were wrapped in blanket and duct tape. But in this deposition, right, Jan confirms and says that practice was gone long before. So when I was at the school, this was after my time. When I was at the school, Jan was just an English teacher. He would come in once a week, and like, we would write papers, right? That is where I found my love for the Lord of the Rings series, right? Because we read those, and then we'd have to write about it, right? Yeah, exactly. I don't watch stuff like that, Cali girl. It is very similar, and everybody that has watched it has come to me and been like, "Oh, did you see it?" Like, anybody that knows that, like, I went to a similar program, but I don't watch stuff like that. I find it to be super triggering, and I'm not triggered easy, right? Like, things don't necessarily bother me like that, but for my own sanity, I just did not watch it. But the producer did email me this morning and told me that he watched it because he's trying to draw inspiration on how he wants to execute the documentary that he's working on. So it's crazy, and it's strange because I think that a lot of people, like, people are, what's the right word? Like, they don't want to believe that this stuff actually happens, right? They don't want to think that these things happen to children, and it's truly crazy. Hold on. All right, so this is just like that they're going through, like, the rules and whatnot, right? Now, as I said earlier, right, this is super what's the right word? Hold on. It's interesting. This case is interesting, right? Because is the attorney was a student, right? And that's not something you have every day, is somebody that has, like, inside knowledge of how the place works, and they're on the other side defending, the victim, right? It's crazy. The beginning is kind of just them talking about Jan's employment history, Jan did have a degree. So Jan was absolutely able to work and teach, right? He has written a couple of books. They actually, when we first got to the family, they would give us his book, something of Imitate the Tiger, and we were forced to read it. It wasn't my cup of tea, but it is what it is. So I tried to highlight things that I absolutely wanted to talk about. This deposition is 200 pages. Granted, there is a lot of it. There is a lot of it that is the table of contents and stuff like that. I started on like page 10, because a lot of it is not relevant necessarily. This is just about his book, right? So this specific book that Jan wrote, right? There was a student was being sexually assaulted by a coach, and then they got a different coach. So they do ask them about. I should have tabbed these pages. They do ask him if there was any relation to the family school, right? So here he said he's talking about Eastridge, right? Eastridge was absolutely a cult, right? And there were staff that came from Eastridge and then got employed by the family, right? So I think it's interesting that he says it was a place for people who wanted to deal with questions of Alcoholics Anonymous in a kind of deeper way. That's just not like accurate, right? So if you think about it, I came in 96. And like I said, he was part-time. He was only there once a week. But in this highlighted area, he's talking about the old family where like it was kids that were there. Tony and Betty are obviously the two people that that he's referencing because they did start it. He says he wasn't willing to work there full time, but he did work part time for several years. I mean, probably more closer to a decade. So this is kind of where he starts addressing the family, right? So in 2010, I'm sorry, in 2000, come on back in. In 2000, he became full time, right? Now, what's interesting is there's a couple of things in this deposition that are just flat out lies, right? But he says he left in 2013. Okay. Now that becomes relevant later on. So he did write books while he was there. I didn't read any of them. I don't know if Jan is a good writer, but I did that, like that. His class, honestly and truthfully, was like a break, right? Because writing has always been an outlet for me. You know what I'm saying? So like it was an escape from like the reality of the situation. That I could say. He did go on and become a family leader, which is why he's actually named in this lawsuit. So hold on. I find it strange that I got to get my laptop charger, y'all. Hold on one second. Explode means he's on today. Hold on, Papa. I'm coming right back, dude. It's okay, Pop. So I do find it strange that he says that Mike or Giros, who was, remember, the director of operations when the parents kind of left, right? Here, Pop, hold on. Let me put the dog on my lap so he stops bothering me. Come on, Pop. Come, sissy. Good boy. So I find it strange that Mike would call Eastridge a cult while also using Eastridge policies and procedures, right? Hold on. So he wasn't there when it first started, but the main idea was that people were trying to dive deeper into questions about addiction and recovery. Um, the cult aspect of it was that the person who started it became more and more dominant in the organization and running of the place. So that was the cult aspect of it. But what he's leaving out is that some of the family's policies and procedures, and more importantly, punishments, okay, were absolutely derived from Eastridge. Okay. Do you have to lick my legs, so dog? Um, all right. So you figure he started in 2000 as full time, right? He also now for anybody that's familiar with the structure of the family, Jan became a family leader, right? So they do break this down a little bit in this deposition. So it's interesting to see that side of it, right? Hold on. He was an English teacher. So he became a family leader in 2001. Okay. Circumstances, that's not important. I will go slow in case people do want to read it, like all of it. And I only kind of highlighted halfway through because I got distracted and I was running out of time and I wanted to remove the victim's name. So you see how he says family leader was basically a person who was co-family leaders, a male and a female, whose job was to work with roughly 25 students, male and female, and oversee their daily lives and among other things. Okay. So I find it interesting that he calls it a fluid situation, right? He was also there for breakfast and lunch, which means he was there for 2 sessions of table topics, right? Oops, sorry. So this is strange. Fluid is a strange word to use, right? Because there could be interruptions during the course of the day that dealt with people and students in my family, and I would have to attend to that. So I really can't say this is when it started and this is when it ended. There were back and forth during the course of the day of what the job were. All right. Now, this is crazy, right? He calls his position as a family leader a glorified babysitter. A glorified babysitter, right? That's crazy to me, right? A glorified babysitter, but including, so you got to remember, like when you're at a family, when you're at a table topic, and if there are sanctions imposed, which he does get into a little bit of, it's the family leader that imposes those sanctions a lot of the time, right? It is the family leader that is degrading you and harassment, right? Like that is coming from the family leader as well as the other students that are sitting at the table, right? So he says he would see it in simple terms as a glorified babysitter. In more detail, I would say that my duties were 1, to try to keep the order among 25 people who had a multitude of emotional problems. I love how it always falls back on us having emotional problems or behavioral problems, right? That's strange to me. 2, to deal with problems that came up within the interrelationships among the students. 3, to help young people deal with some of their emotional problems through talking with them, through groups with their family, through phone calls with their family, and that is how I saw it anyway. But nothing about punishment, nothing about retribution, nothing about humiliation, right? Now, I love that the person asking the questions, we get into that a little later on. That's not important. But fluid is just a terrible word, right? As a group, it would just be breakfast and lunch. Are you aware as to whether the family, anytime you see FFS, it is abbreviation for the Family Foundation School, right? So that's used a lot, but that's just an abbreviation. Were there sex addiction groups for students, right? Now, keep in mind, y'all, we were teenagers, right? Most of us were between 13 and 16, right? And sometimes even younger, right? So like, why would any of us need. If anything, more of us needed trauma work, right? Like victims of sexual assaults and things like that. That's where we should have been, right? But sex addiction groups, like what? So they're trying to get a grasp on what is going on. So what was the word for that? What was the work that was done within those sex addiction groups? I personally feel like it was a way for some of the staff to what's the like elicit, right? Elicit stories out of children. Okay? So it was a form of, based on the idea of Alcoholics Anonymous, it was an opportunity for people to talk about their problems. So you got to remember that Eastridge used All Addicts Anonymous, right? So they took the model of Alcoholics and NA, right? They took the models of NA and AA and felt that it could be used for any type of addiction, okay? But they were both male and female at the time. I'm going to when I was there, right? Were these groups based on each Eastridge's approach to addiction treatment, right? They had a strong sense of Eastridge, right? Now he goes into where did they get that Eastridge influence? So there were, early on in the creation of the family school or the family, the members of the family staff and students, and I hesitate to use staff and students because when it first started, it was not that. It was simply, as I said, two people who had opened up their doors to a whole bunch of kids in trouble, and they would come up to Eastridge from time to time. And then some people from Eastridge, having left Eastridge, went to work at the family school, right? So here's what's interesting, right? Now, I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure somebody might know the answer to this, but if you're running a group, like, shouldn't you be like a social worker or some type of counselor, right? Because those types of groups are supposed to be focused, right? And how can you have focus if you don't know the blueprint on what you should be doing? Papa, leave the cat alone. So he says, I was not a counselor. So the answer would be no training. So then why would you be dealing with these groups, right? But he realizes, he's smart enough to realize what he just said, and watch him flip it. He said, I would refer again to the idea that it was an opportunity to try to help people along the concepts of AA. When you say that it is along the lines of AA, can you explain? So this is kind of what I just said, but it's in different words, right? The idea of the basis of AA is based on the concept of first step, which is powerlessness. And then there are other steps that which deal with looking at oneself and one's character defects, right? Did the sex addiction groups adopt the 12-step model? It was not a formula like that. And the person asks, right? Because you got to remember, there's an attorney here that's also a student, right? So there's very little wiggle room for, like, the student knows, right? So they said, what were students expected to say that they were powerless and to write notebooks and all of that? The short answer to that question would have been yes, right? The family used to make us, like, we all, I shouldn't say we all, but a lot of us made up a lot of bad things, right? Because we were told, like, as you're writing your first dishonesty list, I'll use that as like an example, right? There's staff member that goes over it and they're like, are you sure you didn't do, right? Leading you to think that this is what they want you to say. So you put it on there. But what is that? It's a manipulation tactic to the parent, right? Because if you are such an awful kid, then the family school can save your life, right? So we were absolutely expected to write notebooks. So the short answer should have been yes, right? But not Jan. in any of the groups that I was running, and I have to specify this and clarify this, this was not a big part of what I was doing now. So I do kind of believe that that's right, right? But at least when I was there, but I wasn't there when he became a family leader, right? Family leaders certainly have more responsibility than just a regular staff member or even a teacher, right? The answer is not in a group that I was running. No, he does this a lot in here. You'll see it. You'll see it. So they ask, I'm going to ask you to clarify something, which is you sometimes say that you were running these groups, right? Anybody catch that? Because he just said that he was running these groups, but now he says that because he's not a counselor, you didn't have training. What? So he says, yes, by running them, I would say that I was doing what was simply stating, let's sit down and see if we can help you with the problem that you identified as problematic in your life. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't people that didn't have issues with promiscuity, right? But we're still children, right? We were still children. Did you speak in the sex education groups? Obviously, you see him say yes. Every group that you were involved with, did it always have a counselor present? And he says no. Well, that's weird, because if I was just a teacher, right, and somebody asked me to go and run this, Charlie, don't start, this sex education group, right, where people are being vulnerable and discussing the most intimate shit that you can imagine, right, I would say maybe you should get a licensed clinical social worker for that. That's weird. Okay. Hold on. How did you know how to run the group? What? Like, this is crazy. Now, you got to remember, a lot of us did have different types of trauma, right? So like, it would have been beneficial to have somebody that knew what the fuck they were doing running these groups, right? I mean, call me crazy. Hold on. How many times were you involved in one of the sex education groups? I mean, I get that. He couldn't guess. I certainly was not something that was once a week, not even once a month. It was far more spontaneous. Were groups ongoing? Not necessarily. Weird. Isn't that what we were there for? You know, like, isn't that the type of stuff that our parents thought that we were getting? Weird. It's crazy. Hold on. So I'm going to say that a lot of times a young man coming to me, or a couple of young men coming to me and saying, I have a problem and I would like to talk about it. I'm going to say that 9 times out of 10, that was addressed during a table topic. Okay. But we'll get into that as well, because that logic is just wild. Did you ever work with the female students? Did the students understand that the sex addiction work was part of treatment or not part of treatment? Okay. I like this answer, but it is absolute bullshit. Okay. Nothing about the family school was fucking voluntary. Nothing. There was nothing that we had control over. Okay. And that is a flat out lie. Right. And it's unfortunate, because now he's dead, right? Hold on a second. Was there AA groups in addition to the sexual addiction groups? Yes. Okay, this is interesting. Okay. We used to leave and go to AA groups like in the town of Hancock. Are you familiar with the term mandated reporter? Come on, take it somewhere else. Now they're gonna fight. Give me that. Give me that. Give me that. Give it to sister. Take it somewhere else. Sorry. They're not gonna stop. So he says, yes. What is your understanding of what a mandated reporter is? Weird, right? Weird. If a person knows of a particular issue dealing with sexual abuse or physical abuse, they should report it to the state. Well, Jan, you didn't report it, did you, Jan? Jimmy, did you report it? No, right? No, you didn't. You didn't report it. Do you know how the reporting was to be made? No, I don't. That I don't know. Were you a mandated reporter? As an employee, I believe so. You believe so? You believe so? Did you ever make a report under the mandating reporting requirements? No. No. That's the crazy thing, right? Every single staff member that worked at that place for longer than 2-3 weeks and you did not follow through on your duty to report abuse, you are the problem. Okay? You are the problem. Were you ever trained at Family Foundation School in mandatory reporting in terms of your obligations? Oh, you didn't catch that, huh, Jan? There was one session in 2008. Who ran that training? Somebody from the county, a government person? I think so. But with respect to the sex addiction groups, did you receive any training in how to run these groups? Not from a counselor. No. This is crazy. This is crazy. From anybody? No. Again, I want to clarify this. It was not a formal group. It was simply people getting together to try to help one another. Oh boy. So I will say this. They always pushed prayer on us. He actually says it comes up pretty soon, I think. He actually mentions a prayer that I still say in my head to this very day, by the way, over and over, right? Over and over. But his advice was almost always a spiritual one that dealt with prayer. Okay. So, but he didn't make students do sanctions or any of that as a family leader either. This is like crazy. If you are having a particular problem with one of the things that we emphasize was the idea of what we call, I shouldn't say we called it, it's a centuries old idea called it's Jesus's prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And if you weren't Christian, that was fine. You could just say, Lord, have mercy on me. That's the whole prayer. That's the whole prayer. The idea was to repeat that. At the time that I was at the family school, I probably said that 50,000 times a day, right? Because your mind gets stuck. It's super crazy. Okay, so we were, this is crazy. Are you aware whether there were mandatory AA meetings for the entire FFS student body? He said, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Mandatory AA meetings. Jan, the answer would have been yes. Whether you were an alcoholic or not, you were made to go to AA meetings. Okay. So that's, weird. Do you know whether there was ever AA meetings that the entire FFS school was required to attend? Good answer, Jen. Good answer. Take yourself out of there. That is possible. Again, it probably would have happened in the evening. So for a lot of people, there was like Jan, right? Because he was a teacher, he'd be there for breakfast, he would teach, he'd be there for lunch, he'd teach, and most times wouldn't be there for dinner table topics, right? But there was always they would always have to fill in the gaps of what happened the night before with like a shift change. I don't know who does what. I'm not even seeing the chat, so I'll go back to it in a few minutes. There was always like giving report, right? If you're in the medical fields or you're a nurse, like before the new nurse comes in, you give report, fill them in. That happens every morning. So there is no way that you wouldn't have been aware, right? Did you ever attend such a school-wide meeting? It's possible, but I don't recall. All right. I want to ask you some questions about how the family structure worked, right? Now, remember, he was a family leader, right? Hi, Mighty Cat. Hi, Monique. He was a family leader, right? So they generally have a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more power, if you will. Um, so he goes over the structure, right? Now, this is what I find weird. Hold on. You think that you were responsible, you and your colleagues were responsible for one family. Is that correct? 25 students in the family is correct. Basically, a little less facts. Did the students from that, it was male and female when I was there. I think that it did separate later on, but when I was there, it was co-ed. All right. So this is weird to me. Hi, Ashley. This is weird to me because, all right, the time frame 2012 and 2013, how many families were there? And he says 4, but that is incorrect. When I was at the family, we went from 3 to 4 families. They later went up to 7 and 8. And 2012, 2013 was super close to closing, right? So they might have downsized, but I'm not sure of how much they downsized, right? At some point, there was a shuffling of females. One was all female and one all male. See, that happened much, much later than I was there. But the population of the school had decreased substantially. That's true. Why is the word family used? Right? So it was, here we go. As I alluded to earlier, the whole idea of the family was a family. It was the two people who opened their doors to young people who had no place to go, who were beset by some form of addiction. They came to them voluntarily. That is true. In the beginning, when the family was, before it became the family school, right? Because there's different eras. First, it was the family, then it was the family school, then it was family foundation school, and then it was Allenwood Academy, right? So there were very different stages to the family school as a whole, right? They were not sent there by another organization or caregiver. So the whole concept was of a family that was trying to be replicated on a larger scale. Over time, the family grew and was broken. And when I don't even know what that means. And when I first started there, the property that you're familiar with, they didn't own. The property was given to them. So it was like a small house with literally 25 kids pouring out of the place, and they were trying to administer as well as they could to the needs of these kids. So the idea of family grew out of the origin. You're good, Kelly girl. I don't know, not that I know of my crazy life, right? But we also know, I didn't know before, right? But I know now that they were served a cease and desist, and we're not supposed to be operating as a drug or alcohol treatment center, which is weird because they always marketed themselves as that type of facility. You know what I'm saying? So he goes on to say that he was the father of his family. So different families had different names. Generally they took over, like they used, most times it was like people that were founders of AA. So that's what he's talking about here. It went by Family 7, and then it grew into becoming Talbot House. And then I think there might have been another change after that. If there was, I had left the school. Now, keep in mind, he says he left in 2013, right? Talbot House, that's not necessarily. I want to say in late winter or early spring, I wasn't the family leader there anymore. Talbot named after Matt Talbot, who was an early precursor. So he's just referencing, the attorney is referencing another name of the family, right? You referred to a few times, a couple of times, to the origin, right? Are you aware of whether in the very beginning Tony Argyros required manual labor from the students or the individuals who were staying at what was to become the Family Foundation School, right? Because going back to what I said, right? It started as the family, and that's why they use that verbiage, right? What would go on to become. And he said they worked. They were building houses and creating what is called footers for houses. So yes, there was manual labor. The attorney asks, was the student allowed to opt out of that manual labor? Good answer, Jan. However, he would have still had knowledge of it because it was still a very much so used practice. Work sanctions were very much used until the day that the family closed their doors, right? So no, we were not allowed to opt out of anything. He said, I was only going there once a week, so I couldn't say. And he was only going there once a week to teach English. So this is one of the problems, right? As a teacher in New York State, were you required to have a teaching certificate? Not at a private school. I think that is still true today. And that is true. Did students, to your knowledge, did students also work at a farm? Right? Footers, I'm asking, in addition, did they do other manual labor like working at a farm? He said, I think we're talking about very early on when you were going there once a week. He said, I wouldn't know. Do you know if the family was an operating farm in the late 1980s? The short answer would have just been a yes, right? They had, my recollection is that they had sheep, but I could be wrong. Pigs, right, Jan? They had other animals too, but again, I was not involved with that. So the students who were in a given family, did they eat together in a unit? Yes. Did they attend classes together in a unit? No. Classes were divided by educational background. Like they were divided by what grades we were in. In your capacity as a family leader, did you or were you required to keep any records? No, not really. That's weird. That's strange, right? Did you have to write anything or send reports regarding the status or progress of any given students? All right. Now, there's a reason they're asking these questions, right, y'all? It'll come further along. When a student was getting ready to go see either Dr. Manley or Dr. I forget his name, the other Vogel, sorry. The other psychologists, when they were getting ready to see them, I would sometimes write a report about what their status or how their behavior was. Do you remember a student named and the victim's name? And he says vaguely. Did you ever write a report regarding her? Not that I recall. No. Was blank in your family? Again, yes, she was in the beginning. But it's trunk. Like, what is he even saying? During what period of time was blank in your family? I think I was told by my attorney that she arrived in January of 2013 and left in July of 2013. So during that time there would have been some months I was her family leader. Okay. So this is just a misspeak. Hold on. Dr. Manley, my understanding, was the overriding psychologist. I could be wrong about that term, though. Did you ever speak to him? Really? So, like, you got to remember, y'all, like, we're here for this is what we're here for, right? We're here for treatment, and there's no treatment, right? It's crazy. So during the course of a couple of months, he might have had 2 or 3 conversations. I'm sorry. What were the reasons you would speak to Dr. Manley? Okay. Oh, no problem. He was going to see a particular student, and actually, I would not even speak with him. I would send him an email. That's important, right? That's important. Were there any occasions in which you actually spoke to Dr. Manley? Very rarely. Did you review any documents? I did not. Did the family members sleep in the same location? All right. So we were also divided by family, right? Like for instance, I got there and I was in family 1 when family 4 opened, right? Because they needed more, they were receiving more kids, right? They grew exponentially like around the time that I was there. You did sleep. I slept in the trailers with the girls that were in my family, right? So you did sleep with your family, you ate with your family. Later on, they would go out on outings with their family. We didn't do any of that when I was there. There were male and female quarters. The boys that were in my family slept in a trailer. Hi, Brandy. I think the girls did too, although at one point they built dorms, and it could have been that the girls gone down to the dorms. So when I first got there, I lived underneath Porgia, okay, because it was, when I got there, a female's dorm. That did change to a male dorm, right? And it makes you wonder, knowing what we know now, why that change was done, right? It's interesting. Just to go back, hold on. When you say 2 or 3 times in total, that's how many times a family leader would speak to a psychiatrist. So, interesting. Did you ever obtain advice from Dr. Manley on how to deal with any particular students? The answer to that would be no. Wait a second. Shouldn't all of the policies and procedures be being reviewed by a psychiatrist or anybody, any type of somebody with a license, right? That could help you decide whether those treatments were appropriate or not? No, nobody ever thought of that. It's crazy. If you needed advice about how to deal with a particular student, what, if anything, would you do? So let me ask you a question. Hi. Let me ask you this. Let's say that you work for a facility like this, right? And if you're having, imagine that, huh? If you're having problems with a student that you would consider problematic for one reason or another, don't you think that you would discuss that student with psychiatrists or counselors or somebody that could kind of teach you how to, I don't want to use the word handle, but that could, yeah, it's crazy. So he says he would probably talk to Rita and also discuss with Dawn. So Dawn Posimato, who was named in this lawsuit, was the co-leader of Jan's family. And he drew a blank. Oh, so he does say he'd speak to Dr. Vogel. Did you ever have any conversations with Dr. Manley or Dr. Vogel about and the victim, right? Is there any particular reason why you never had such a conversation? I just don't recall ever having a conversation with either one. What? It's crazy to me. It is crazy to me. Okay. Is your memory that you never spoke to Dr. Vogel or Dr. Manley about victim, or that you don't remember whether you did or not? Okay. So Jan says, I guess I would say I don't remember, but I mean, it's pretty clear in my mind that I didn't speak with them. I don't recall ever having a conversation with either one of them about victim, but we were dealing with several students, and it is possible that I did. Now, I don't know about y'all, but somebody that was being sexually assaulted and in my family, right? Like if I'm the family leader and a student in my family is being sexually assaulted, you wouldn't remember that conversation, Jen. You wouldn't, it just slipped right on by you, huh? It's crazy. Were students expected to regard the other students in their family as brothers and sisters? So yes and no, right? I think that we were supposed to, but not all of us did. Did we have good relationships? And like I said this to the producer last night as well. We're like, those people are the only people that could understand what we went through emotionally, psychologically. The bonds that you have, even with students that I've never met, right? That I've never spoke to, you still have like this unspoken thing, right? But I personally, like some of them I was close to, and keep in mind, I was on Blackout with Boys my entire stay, right? However, most of the people that I do talk to are boys, right? It's crazy how that works out. What was Dawn Posimano's role? She was the co-leader, and she was primarily responsible for the female students, and I was primarily responsible for the male students. Way to escape accountability, Jan. Way to escape it. In 2013, what was the split between male and female? 70-30. Did you consider yourself to be a spiritual leader in the house? He didn't catch that. I considered myself to have some experience that I can share with others, and certainly the concept of spirituality was a part of it. So this is a flat out lie. In terms of the spirituality, was it strictly a Christian spirituality? It wasn't strictly, no, that's a lie. When I first got to the family, Catholicism was forced on us, whether you were Catholic or not, right? This is not. So he says, so I happen to, and this is what I would say to students, I happen to be a practicing Christian. I happen to have a strong sense of other religions as well, including Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. I do not know a lot about Islam, and I shared those ideas with students, both in my classroom and the family. He did. I will say that he absolutely exposed us to spiritual text. And there was always like the space trilogy, right? There was always this religious connotation to it, right? So I don't think that, I don't see Jan like that, but that's just about religion. We're about to get to the real fucking crazy stuff. He's just saying what he taught. Okay, so there were students who had to take the New York State Regents to pass and get a Regents diploma. So there were the teachings that I did. If a student needed a Regents diploma, was certainly kept in mind. So you got to keep in mind that New York did, at the time that I was in high school, did have an option to not get a Regents diploma, right? However, in order for me to take the Regents that most would just take at the end of the year on that subject matter, I had to pass a qualifiers. So I had to take 3 like old Regents, and my average had to be a 75 to just take the test, right? That is not normal practice for most schools in New York. It's strange. I don't even know if we had AP literature, but okay. So this is just him talking about the Regents and his classes. That's really not the stuff that, okay. So he says, can you tell me what you remember about the victim, right? And I'll say it again, like, I understand that this stuff is public information, right? I choose on my platforms to try to shield the names as much as I can. As I said, my memory is vague. He was also sick already at this point in time when this deposition was done in February. He had already been diagnosed with cancer. I can't even picture what she looks like. Strange, right? That's strange, because that student, right? Why wouldn't, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but for me, if I was a family leader and there was a student that was being sexually assaulted, and instead of acknowledging the student being sexually assaulted and changing something to do with it, you threw sanctions on her, right? You don't remember that? But that's crazy to me. So she was like other students who came there troubled and had difficulties, but I couldn't tell you what they were. I don't remember. Now, this is interesting because you then go to get into it, right? When you say that she was troubled, can you say what you mean by that? She came to the school because there was a difficulty at home. So that certainly I could infer that there was trouble. Weird. Jimmy, isn't that what you said? We couldn't make it at home. Wasn't that your words? And that's the kind of shit that I mean about staff all regurgitating the same narrative, right? They all do it. They all do it. Do you recall any conversations with the victim? He says, I don't. Do you recall an incident involving the victim in 2013? An incident? I don't know what you mean. Too many incidents to choose from, huh, Jan? Do you recall an incident in which blank reported that her therapist was engaging in sexual relations with her? No. You have no recollection of that at all? No. So did you ever see an investigation report involving victim and an incident where she reported that her therapist had sexual relations with her? I did not. No. Are you aware of whether Family Foundation school students, were forbidden to have access to telephones? Yes, that is standard operating procedures. What is the reason for that? So the real reason is so that we couldn't tell our parents that we were being abused. That's the reason. That would have been the appropriate response, right? But this is staff reasoning, right? The idea was that they needed to be away from the influences that had been problematic for them in the past. Well, that's weird because the only people we were allowed to speak to was our immediate family. So, how could our immediate family be influencing us now, don't get me wrong, I understand different families, different dynamics. I get it, right? However, we weren't allowed to talk to anybody else. So what influences? What are you talking about? Did you know who instituted that policy? That goes back many years. The answer is no. I don't know who instituted the policy, but when I joined the school full time, that was certainly in place already. It was always a policy. Was students also forbidden access to television, radio, and newspaper? Yes. Was it the same reason? Same reason. Were there limitations placed on the music that Family Foundation students were allowed to listen to? Yes. What were the limitations? I think that the family leaders would determine what the music was. So this policy came into practice after I left, much later after I left. He talks about it a little bit. So different families would allow like music therapy sessions, but certain music was always not allowed, right? What was the reason? Would you describe the limitation? He says, I think that if somebody thought that it was a particular song that would trigger drug memories of drug use or alcohol or sexual behavior or violence, then it wasn't going to be allowed. Let me also clarify that that idea about the music goes all the way back to when the family started, which is true. It was the students themselves, and they were not students. It was the young people themselves who made the decision that certain music should not be listened to. I call bullshit. How was the music reviewed to determine whether or not it was appropriate for the residents? It was just a blanket thing when I was there. There was no music. Like, we'd be allowed to listen to church hymns, right? Or like, stuff like that. I think that if it was a song that was dealing with drug use, I think that it would not be something, right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I one time got put on blackout, personal blackout, meaning there was a girl that I couldn't talk to because we wrote the lyrics to Comfortably Numb. We didn't even sing it. We wrote them and we were put on personal blackout, meaning we could not communicate with each other. Did students have, what do you call them these days, a Walkman or anything like that to listen to music? No. So where did they listen to music when they did listen to music? He said it would have been played in the family by some staff, and the staff would have cleared the idea that they wanted to listen to this particular music, and there would be an agreement that would be such, and they would put the music on. Would it be accurate to say that the music was characterized as music expressing Christian values? Abso-fucking-lutely. Absolutely. Is there another way you could describe the characteristics of the music that was permitted? I think each family had its own criteria. So I do think that did become a thing later on, right? but certainly not when I was there. When I was there, it was just nothing. And he says, only because I was not there in the evenings when they might have been playing music. So, the answer is no. It would not be necessarily have to be Christian, but it couldn't be drug related or something that was violent. How about hip hop? Was that categorically excluded? It was not. Hip hop music would not have been played. Who was responsible for the students after you left for the day? He says there were different staff members. There was. Hold on. So he asked for a list of names who were responsible for the residents when he left in 2013. And Jan just names a couple of them. Jimmy is not mentioned. I've heard really bad things about this Vinny and Juanita. Again, like really this is years after I left, but as best as you can explain the difference between your responsibilities for the residents versus their responsibilities for the residents. So what they're asking him is like family leader's responsibility for the residents versus a regular staff member that would come in, And he says, well, I think primarily Dawn and I would be the ones that would be in touch with the family, with the parents, or whoever the caregivers were. If there was an issue that dealt with something in the dorm, we would be the ones who would talk to administration about how to deal with it. So the responsibilities towards upward to Dawn and me. Also sanctions, punishments, any type of stuff like that would fall on the family leader, right? Did Dawn and Vinny and do you know what their educational requirements were for that position? No. The staffing was people who generally cared about kids and were willing to work weekends, evenings, and educational wise, you would have to ask the administration. He asks about the staff that he's talking about. I don't know this staff member, but again, I didn't hear good things. So he asked if he spoke to Colton about the case. Yeah, always. The other people that you mentioned, when they were responsible for the residents, was it one person or more than one person during those evening hours? There were usually two people. You also have to remember that senior staff, when I was there, Bob and Susan, Mike and Cindy, Tom and Mary, they all lived on property, right? So there was always staff around. Do you know if they kept any reports or made memos? I don't, not that I ever saw it. No. This is interesting, okay? Are you familiar with the term table topics? Yes. This is crazy. What is that? That was at lunchtime or breakfast or dinner time. A person who was having a particular problem would be asked to stand and give an accounting of themselves. What do you mean by accounting? It might be, I will give you an example that happens from time to time. Someone got mad and punched out a window. So at a table topic, you would stand up and say, well, what is going on? Why did you get mad? What is going on? And discuss that. I find it really strange that he uses something that barely ever happened, right? Something much more frequently, Jan, would have been flirting, being manipulative, stuff like that. That probably happened once, and he uses that as an example to push it, shirk the responsibility back to us. Who determines whether or not there would be a table topic? Usually the final decision was done to me. So if you wanted to bring yourself up, you had to let the family leader, if it was your family, if it was a different family, you had to ask them for permission. Right. Any reason to bring up jerking off. I said that to the producer yesterday. I said, I don't know how, but almost every single time. I don't know how they did the mental gymnastics to get there, but it always was brought back to something sexual. Always. And if Tony was there, forget it. On a weekly, this is hilarious, y'all. And it's not funny, but it is hilarious. On a weekly basis, how frequently were table topics held? Usually every day. What the fuck do you mean usually? 3 times a day. Every day. What are you saying? Both lunch and dinner, correct. Not usually at breakfast because there was a time constraint. I had table topics at breakfast because there was what? A time constraint. Did you speak with the resident and tell them that they were going to be required to participate in a table topic? Okay. Let's I'm going to read this and then we'll break it down. He says, I am not sure what you mean by speak with them. Yes, at a certain point, they knew they were going to be involved. Yeah, usually when you heard and your name, what in the fuck are you talking about? Prior to it occurring, Papa, he said prior to it? Yes. Or did they find out right then and there at the table that you have to participate in a table topic? Okay. It was usually right then and there, although sometimes, Papa, stop. Somebody would actually come and say, I would like to come and check in. Okay. Right. Exactly. My crazy life. Right. Now, this is the best part about it. Papa. This is the best part about it. Okay. Was this considered a form of punishment, therapy, or something else? It was not a form of punishment. It was an opportunity to discuss difficulties that were going on. Sorry. Were residents permitted to decline to participate in the table topic session? The answer would be no. At some point, they were going to have to talk to the students. Okay. Why are you barking? What was the idea of a resident talking to other students? I'm sorry, at a table top, Papa, come on. Well, the idea goes back again to the formation of the school or the formation of the family. The idea was that the young person might well be able to hear a piece of useful information that could help them from their peers better than they could from staff. So the concept was peer-to-peer help. To your knowledge, did a psychologist or psychiatrist ever review the table topics process? There were time to time where either Dr. Vogel or before him, a man named Dr. Moss, would be present at the table topics. When? Were the table topics both male and female? Correct. Did the tabletops ever involve sexual issues? From time to time, that would come up, yes. Was there ever concern about discussing sexual issues with the opposite gender or the opposite sex, right? Jan says, I think that it was something that was the history of the family school, was that this was a procedure that was already part of the process before I came to the school. So it had a history that was going on. What? So that makes it okay? It makes it okay that you sat there while children were verbally abused? That makes it okay? So he asks, did a psychologist or psychiatrist ever review the procedure where residents were required to discuss sexual issues before someone of the other gender? Not that I know of, no. Jen says, during these table topics, am I correct that there was a U formed by the dining room tables? Jan says that is correct. The question says, and were students required to stand up at the open end of it? Correct. And were they expected to describe whatever misdeed they had engaged in to the entire group? Jan says it would depend on what the table topic was, and there would be a nuance involved with whether the person was going to talk about something openly or not. When? What are you talking about? So the person says, can you explain what that means, what you mean by that? He says, long before blank, there was a young man who had been accosted while sexually accosted while he was in a juvenile home, and it was clear that he was distraught, and we did not ask him to talk about that, but he confided in me later about what had happened. So that is what I mean by a nuance. That is a crock of fucking shit. That is a crock of shit. I have seen table topics that they shredded people, that having dead parents, and told that student that they're the reason their parents were dead. Okay. Would you characterize the participation of a student in describing misconduct as voluntary or mandatory? He said it was not mandatory. How could a student opt out of describing the misconduct? And Jan says she could say that she didn't want to talk about it. That's fucking bullshit. We were not able to say, I don't want to talk about it and just go sit down. That is a fucking lie. So the question says, what would happen then? The person would be allowed to sit down or something else. The person would have been directly yelled at and sent to the fucking corner. That's the appropriate answer, Jan. So Jan says, again, it would depend on the situation. I think that it could be that we, Dawn and I, would say, okay, we'll talk about it later or something like that. I don't think I've ever seen that done, ever. So they asked him if a student said they did not want to discuss past misconduct or current misconduct, and they were required to talk about it anyway, would that be a violation of Family Foundation School protocol? And Jan says, historically, no. In other words, it had happened that way from the beginning. I don't know about other students, but there were plenty of things that I had to discuss at table topics that I did not want to fucking discuss at table topics. So the person says, I'm sorry, can you explain that? And Jan says there had been many, many times where students were asked to talk about sensitive issues, and I have seen people have breakthroughs about issues that were difficult to talk about, not just about sex, but other topics too. Hold on a second, y'all. Hold on. I just got to answer this text. Sorry. So the person is just trying to understand. They said, so I just want to make sure I understand this. If a student said they didn't want to talk about a topic and they were required to talk about it anyway, would that be a violation of FFS protocol? And Jan says, no, not necessarily. We were not allowed to do that ever. I've seen students have to talk about being molested, raped, and they didn't want to do that. And all done in a very derogatory way. So, like, this is just bullshit. Bullshit. Sorry. When you say not necessarily, can you say what you mean? Jen says, again, I would say that the concept of requirement was being practiced pretty much from the beginning of the creation of the school, and it was being practiced in all families. That doesn't mean that you should have fucking followed suit. So that is what I mean by it was in accordance with what the school's approach was. What if the school's approach was immoral? What if the school's approach was unethical? Y'all just like little sheep? Get the fuck out of here. So they asked, was that approach put in any written documents? No. Why would they put child abuse in documents? How did you know that approach was acceptable? From personal experience. Who was your supervisor? It would have been an administrator. At that time in 2013, it would have been Rita. Rita was Mike's sister. Was there a specific person that gave you the understanding that it was not a violation of FFS protocol to require a student to speak on a topic that they did not want to speak on at the table topics event? He said no, there wasn't a specific person. It's crazy that, like, I wonder if they actually believe this stuff. You know what I mean? That's just more of that. So he asked if he recalled the victim being at any table topics. I don't recall it, but I would not say it didn't happen, but I simply don't recall it. Was students ever humiliated by participating as the subject of a table topic? He said, I don't recall that. It is possible, though. Interesting. Did you ever have a conversation with a student about whether or not they felt humiliated by being required to participate in a table topic? Jan says, I'm thinking about that. I certainly had many conversations with students about a table topic. Whether or not the idea of humiliation was a part of that, I don't think so. Again, it was an opportunity in my mind of trying to help somebody deal with a particular problem. During the table topics, were students who were the subject of the table topic, were they criticized by the residents who were not the subject of the table topic? Jan answers that behavior was certainly questioned. The concept of criticized, in my mind, is a big one, because what you might consider criticism, the other person who was offering the conversation at that point might see it as I'm simply trying to help this person. I really want to know how many young girls you helped by calling them whores and telling them that they would have to rely on their body in life. I'm really curious to know the answer to that. Did you ever see a resident who was, I am not sure what word you want to use, you don't want to use criticized, but a student who was saying something to the resident who was the subject of the table topic? Did you ever see a student speak aggressively to the resident who was the subject of the table topic? And Jan says, I might use the word loudly. Aggressively would be loudly, is what I would want to say. So I've seen Tony Ogiros, the owner, scream in girls' faces that they were sluts, right? At 15, virgins, right? That's not aggressive. That's not aggressive. When a resident spoke loudly to a resident who was the subject of the table topic, did you intercede and tell the loudly speaking resident to not speak so loudly? He said sometimes. I'll go with never. How would you decide whether or not to do that? And he said, it was based on the moment at the time, as to based on my experience with other table topics and working with students as to whether or not the scenario was actually going to be useful. Weird. What was the criteria that you would use to decide whether or not to tell the loudly speaking resident not to speak loudly to the student who was the subject of the table topic? And he said there was no specific, oh, this is now too loud. It was not that specific. You were reading what was going on at the moment with the student, with the other students, and whether or not this particular table topic was going to be of use to the person. It was not like, oh, now we measure the decibels. I think it's disgusting that you find sarcasm in this topic, right? Were you ever concerned about the students who were being spoken loudly to were being humiliated by that experience? And Jan says, well, again, I was looking at it, trying to make an assessment as to what the use of this particular conversation was. Did anyone ever train you in how to make that assessment? No. Did you ever read anything that helped you decide how to make that assessment? And he says, probably, but I couldn't tell you what it could have been. Is there any way that you can describe what you would have read on that topic? No, I don't recall. Would you say that any of the students who were the subject of the table topic were scolded? And Jan asks, to them to just define what they mean by scolded because he had no idea, right? And Jan says, if I were talking to my dog and she had done something wrong, I would scold her and say, you're a bad dog. In terms of what was going on with the person who was at the table topic, if their behavior, particularly if it was hurtful to another person, I think it is possible that I would use the terminology that that behavior was unacceptable. So the questioner says, I will explore the same idea, but now I want to ask you about berate. Did you ever feel that any of the students who were the subject of the table topic had been berated at that event? And Jan says, I would put it this way, that that behavior had been berated. Yes, bullshit. And I think in my mind, there is a distinct difference between a person and their behavior. Bullshit. Bullshit. How was that distinction made during a table topic? And he said, let me see if I can give you an example of that. I recall one incident. I love how he is using things that almost never happened. There were daily girls, teenage girls that already had shattered self-esteem, stood up in front of their family and called whores, mocked, disgusting things said to them. But you pick punching a window and somebody stealing, that stuff never happens. So he alludes to somebody opens up the Christmas present of somebody else and stole the gift, rewrapped the present. So when the person was not one of the more favorite people, he had a lot. He aggravated. That happened once, right? Let's talk about the things that were done on a daily basis. Sorry. Okay. Was that student or resident humiliated by this table topic event? And Jen says he should have been humiliated by the fact that he did something to hurt another human being. And if I helped him see that, good. Did you conclude that the table topic did help the student to see what you wanted the student to see? And he said, I couldn't say for sure. Table topics were not effective, right? And any psychologist, psychiatrist, clinical social worker, anybody that holds any type of clinical license in that field would tell you that attack therapy is not good. It does more harm than good, right? Weird. During the table topics, were the residents who were not the subject of the table topic at that point encouraged or invited to suggest sanctions? And he said that could be, sure. How would that occur? Well, again, it goes back to the history of the school that the students themselves could see something that could be useful to that person. Let's get into sanctions by Jan, right? What were the kind of sanctions that the residents would suggest for the person who was the subject of the table topic? Well, one was standing or sitting in a corner. One was to be, it was a girl or boy. If it was a boy and he was being flirtatious, it would be blackout with girls. One might be not wearing makeup. These are some of the things that come to mind. Ultimately, who decided what discipline residents would receive? And Jan says Dawn and I would make that decision if it were our family. Were the residents who had not been called out to be the subject of a table topic required to participate in the table topic? It's crazy. Hold on. How would you determine if someone was not paying sufficient attention to the table topic? I've been stood up for not paying attention, allegedly, in table topics, like spaced out, looking in the corner. Some of these things were brutal to watch, right? It's crazy. See? In simple terms, looking around, poking at that table, simply not paying attention. I mean, as a teacher, I know who's paying attention and who is not, but as not as a fucking counselor, you shouldn't be here giving advice either. So then that person would become the subject of a table topic themselves. Is that correct? And he said they could. Did you require students to discuss their sexual feelings in front of their peers at these table topics? And again, skirting the issue, right, Jan? I think if there was a particular issue that was troubling them that dealt with the sexual matter, that could be explored. You spelled exploited wrong. Were students required at times to disclose their own sexual or romantic feelings in front of the table topic group? If they were having romantic thoughts about someone else in the family, yes, that could be detrimental to the family. So that would be something that we would want to know that was going on. With regard to sexual thoughts, I think that most of that was dealt with in a smaller group. Bullshit. Do you know how many table topics I had to sit through of a student being brought up for masturbating? That wasn't the whole family's business. So to say that it would be discussed in a group setting is a bold-faced lie. Bold-faced lie. Were students allowed to decline to discuss their sexual or romantic feelings at a table topic events? And he says, yes, they could certainly decline. Bullshit. Bullshit. There was no declining a table topic without being punished for it. And if they declined, would there be a situation where they would be required to discuss that topic? Jan says, I think that there would be a follow-up regarding the issue was. But would they be required to discuss it at a table topic, right? And Jan says, well, in the end, there was no way that you would force a person to talk about something if they don't want to talk about it. No, you just throw the punishments on, right? Would you tell the students that they have to talk about it? And he said, I would probably say something along the lines at some point, like you need to get clear of whatever this is. If a student refused to talk at a table topic, would you put them in the corner? And he says, it is possible. If they were being belligerent, bullshit. You would absolutely put them in the corner if they were not discussing, if they did not stand up and take the abuse at that table topic. That's bullshit. So they asked him what he meant by belligerent. And he said, in other words, standing up there basically saying F you. If they didn't use the F word, but they said, I'm not talking about it, would they be put in the corner? And Jan says, not necessarily. That is a lie. How would you decide whether or not to put someone in the corner? And Jan said it was based on what was going on at the time in that particular scenario. The question says, did you think that the process of putting someone in the corner could be humiliating for that person? And Jen says, I don't think that it was humiliating. I think that all they had to do was say, I would like to talk to somebody, and they would be out of the corner. Who are you kidding? This is crazy. So they push them further, right? But if they were not out of the corner, could it be humiliating to be in the corner? He says, I don't know. You'd have to ask the person who was in the corner. Like, are you joking? And he said, well, respectively, if you're the one who was putting the person in the corner, did you make an assessment as to how that process could affect a student? And Jen says, I think that the answer is the idea of being in the corner in our family had mostly had to do with being belligerent. And if a person wished to be a part of the family, it was easy enough not to be in the corner. Right? Now, what does that say? That says you're going to comply or you're going to sit in the corner. You're going to be degraded, and you're going to have to talk about your deepest, darkest secrets in front of a room of 30 people, or you're going to sit in the corner. That's what I read. Like, what? Other than humiliating the student, what other purpose was there for requiring a student to be in the corner? And he says the main idea of being in the corner was time away to give yourself some time to think about what was going on. That was the whole purpose of it. It was not a punishment. It was simply a way of being in the corner to say, why have I ended up in this position and what is going on with me? So it was not a matter of punishment. Were students ever required to remove their shoes when they stood in the corner? Yes. What was the purpose of that? If they were a runaway threat, that was standard operating procedure. Do you ever wonder why so many kids try to run away from there? How would a student run away if they were inside the building? They were not always inside the building. There were several buildings. They would go to classes. Well, when I was there was only one building, but there were lots of possibilities for running away. Other than preventing a student from running away, was there any other purpose to requiring a student to remove their shoes when they stood in the corner? And he says, not in my mind, no. Was there ever a circumstance under which a student was not allowed to sit at a table to eat their meals? And he said there might have been. Was that a form of discipline? It was a form of a person who didn't want to participate in the rules of a family group would be asked to sit in the corner and eat their meals because they didn't want to follow the rules of a family structure. Interesting. How would they eat their meals if they didn't have a table to put their plate on? And he said they would balance it was just like being at a picnic. Are you kidding me? You would balance your food on your lap. Did they have or were they allowed to sit while they ate in the corner? Yes. Was this a discipline that you could see would be humiliating to a student? He says, I don't know if they saw it as humiliating or not. Did you ever think that whether or not it could be humiliating for the student? And he said, I would have to say that they certainly could see it that way. Would it be acceptable to you as a family leader that a student was being humiliated? Okay. Here comes some more staff vomit projectile words, right? Here's that narrative. I think that the idea of putting a person in the corner and having them eat their food that way was something that could easily be reconciled. And the humiliation part of it in my mind was this. Your behavior was so bad in this family structure that the family doesn't wish you to be a part of it right now. If you feel humiliated about that, then you should look at your behavior. Let's talk about that for a second. Okay. It's that they're throwing the responsibility back onto us, right? But 9 out of 10 of the table topics that I've seen were like crazy things. It wasn't, something that was even something that would have gone unnoticed in like a normal setting, right? So would you describe that as a form of ostracizing the student? And he said it certainly was. They were not allowed at the table. Do you know if students were ever required to stand and eat their meals in the corner? I always sat in the corner. I didn't stand. He said, not that I recall. Did you receive instructions as to what was permissible regarding that? And he said, from a supervisor who said that this is what you can and can't do. And the person said, right. And he said, no, it was what I had seen over my years of being in other families. And I know that the administration used that technique as well if they were, for whatever reason, running a family. Was students, we're going to get into some interesting stuff. Sorry. Were students, when this putting students in the corner, did that have a name for? And he's like, when they were put in the corner, did it have a name? And he said, did you call it anything specific? No, it was just in the corner. So I find this interesting because it's a fucking blatant lie. Okay. Were students, when they were put in the corner, were they required to go and stand or sit in the corner of every room they entered while they were on this punishment? And he said that could happen from time to time. It was not always the case. How long would that punishment last for? It depended on the student. What was the range, please? Ready? Are you ready for this? Is the other student in the chat still? Billy, are you still here? Okay. It might be a day to 3 days. And they asked, the most is 3 days? And he says, yes, that's my recollection. I think other families might have gone further than that. Let me clarify that. A student who was in our family could be in the corner for longer than that. The idea that they would have to go to every classroom and stand in the corner, that did not last long. I can assure you, after I ran away, I sat in that fucking corner for 3 weeks straight. So I don't know where this 1 to 3 days comes from. 3 weeks straight, okay? No shoes because I ran away. So that's going to be a no, right? Oh, man, I think I just lost my page, y'all. Hold on a second. So absolutely not. Absolutely not. There was no, in order to get out of the table, in order to get out of the, how long have you spent in the corner? Sorry. I just wondered, like, what's the longest time you spent in the corner? Or did you find that the normal time that you were in the corner was 1 to 3 days? 1 to 3 days, Jan says, was the longest somebody spent in the corner. Now, mind you, when you're in the corner, I didn't go to class. That must have came after me. I wasn't going to other places. I sat in that corner. How could a student participate in class if they were standing in the corner? Weird, right? That's why it didn't last long. From my viewpoint as a teacher, I didn't want a student in my room standing in the corner. So I would go to the other family leader and say, this is unacceptable. We got to change it. So as far as I'm concerned, as a family leader, the idea of putting a person on requiring them to stand in the corner in the classroom was not something that I did usually not at all. To your knowledge, could that kind of punishment, this standing in the corner, last for weeks or months? And he said it could last a week. Could it last a month in the family, that is? Did you ever observe it lasting as long as a month, even though it was not your punishment? Right. Facts. And he says, if it was another family, it's possible that it did. Okay. I will ask you about other forms of discipline that students may or may not have received. Was students ever disciplined by requiring them to cut their hair short? Yes, I was one of them. They made me cut my hair up to my chin. He said that could happen. I don't recall in our family that we've ever done that. I do know that it happens in other families. Was students disciplined by being required to wear baggy clothing? That could happen too. Again, if it had happened in our family, it would have been. I don't remember using that as a requirement. Are you familiar with the poverty sanction? I was also on poverty. And he says, I heard the term. Yes. What is that? He says, I honestly couldn't describe it. I don't know. We used it very much. So you know what the sanction is, right? But you can't describe it or what its purpose was or why we were put on them. Are you aware of it being used in other families? Yes. What happened to a student who was on a poverty sanction? And Jan says, I can't describe it because I didn't. It was not something that I used. I'd have to think about it. I can't recall. Are you familiar with the term dress down? I was also on dress down. He says, yes. What is that? It is basically that you're going to wear modest clothes, simple clothes, and not be flamboyant in your looks. Was this for allegations of sexual misbehavior? And Jan said it could be. Were there other reasons why it could have been implemented? Jan says, I think it's probably because the person was being overly flirtatious. Can you explain what you mean by overly flirtatious? And Jan says they were trying to get the attraction of somebody of the opposite sex. Was there a level of flirtatiousness that was acceptable? And Jan says we were not. You had boys and girls most of them had a history of sexual promiscuity. So the idea of trying to keep them, and they had plenty of hormones going on, trying to keep all that at bay was as possible. So that was, the idea was if you saw somebody that was clearly trying to get the attention of another person, then that would be a reason for questioning their behavior. Was there a sanction that forbids students to wear makeup? Yes, I was also on that. What was the reason for that? And he said, again, it was the same thing. It was the idea that you were trying to gain the attention of somebody in the opposite sex. That sanction goes all the way back to the creation of the school. It was the students themselves who made up the idea of no makeup. I was put on no makeup because I took pride in the way that I looked, right? Because we couldn't have you having confidence, right? Also the same reason that I was forced to cut my hair. Not because it was flirting. I was on blackout with boys. How do you know it was the students who came up with no makeup? And he said, because I was volunteering up there once a week and those kinds of issues would come up. Were the students ever sanctioned by requiring them to perform manual labor? And he said, can you clarify what you mean by manual labor? Well, for example, carrying buckets of rocks up and down a hill. Jan says, the rock idea was something that the other families used. I modified that so that the concept was basically this. If a person was having some difficulties and they needed some time out of class, I would say, okay, we'll take you out of class for the morning and you are going to go outside and pick up a rock and you will say a prayer and put the rock in the bucket. If you don't want to say a prayer, that's fine. And you can have two people out there, two friends of yours to go out there with you. So it was not manual labor putting the rocks in the bucket and carrying it up and down. That's how we approached it. That's a crock of shit. That is an excuse for a sanction. The person asked, what was the purpose of the labor that you did sanction students with? And he says it was simply to have some time away and be reflective. It was kind of, in a sense, kind of a Zen idea that you would do something that would, on one hand, was meaningless, but you could bring some meaning into it by trying to be reflective. I can fucking assure you the only thing that any student did on a work sanction is curse the fuck out of that place. Nobody is meditating while doing work sanctions. It's not happening. Was students ever required to mow lawns? And he said the answer is yes. There was a part of the jobs of keeping the place fit. Now, my recollection through, though, by the time of 2013, there were students being paid to mow the lawns, and I don't even know if there were students or whether they were senior students or what their relationships were. Was students ever permitted to carry cinder blocks as a punishment? Jan says, to do what? And the person repeats, carry cinder blocks. And he said, in other families, that is not something that we ever employed. That's weird. That's weird. Every other family but yours, huh, Jan? And he says, are you familiar? I'm sorry. The person asked, are you familiar with the term blackout as a punishment? And he says, yes. What is a blackout? Blackout was you were not going to have any contact with your family. And he said, the question is, or people outside your family or outside the family? Yes. How was that enforced? Jan says, you couldn't have a phone call. I think that was standard operating procedure. That when a student first came to the school, and the parents were quite aware of this, they agreed to it. The first 30 days, there would be no contact between the student and the parents. And after that, they would get that first phone call. And then there would be a weekly phone call set up from that time forward, if I'm not mistaken. Question is, a student on blackout, would they be prohibited from speaking to that family? And Jan says that is correct. A student on blackout, would be forbidden to speak with any other students? And Jan says that could be possible. And the question says, how long would that blackout last? What was the range? And Jan says it could be a month or longer with the family. That is for the phone calls. Oh, boy. How about when you say the family, you mean the FFS school, right? Yeah. And the question says that a student could be on blackout and not allowed to speak to that FFS family members for as much as a month. Is that correct? And he said, no, that would be pretty long. I would not say that to be the case. Okay. I was on blackout with my family when I ran away for 3 months. Question says, what was the longest you've ever saw that a student was prohibited from speaking to another resident? Whoa, hold on a second. Did I read that right? What was the longest you ever saw that a student was prohibited from speaking to other residents at family? He says maybe a week. But again, it's just his family, right? I don't know about the other families. That's a fucking lie, dude. I was on blackout with boys the entirety of my stay. 3 days I was there when I got put on blackout with boys, and I stayed on blackout with boys until the day that I walked away from that shithole. That's crazy. What was the longest that students would be prohibited from speaking to their family of origin? And he said that could be about a month. It could be 2 to 3 or 4 phone calls. Such a fucking lie, dude. How were the phone calls made when they got to speak to their family? Was it a telephone at FFS or something else? And Jan says it was a telephone at FFS. The first phone call was done with a family leader and what was called a sponsor and a junior sponsor. And they made the call home and talked to their parents. He's elaborating about what a sponsor and a junior sponsor is. Oh, and he was a sponsor as well. That's weird, Jan. You don't have a lot of information for somebody that was a family leader and a sponsor. That's strange. Sorry. I'm not doing that right now. Um, understand the difference. This isn't really of importance. I think that it's pretty cut and dry. What, if anything, would happen to a resident who spoke with a person who was on blackout? In other words, a person who was on blackout with other students, they would be confronted about it, usually at a table topic, by the way. I saw you blackout with blah, blah, blah. They'd be brought up. Were there potential, oh God, potential disciplinary actions taken against the student who spoke to the student on blackout? And Jan says there could be. You're damn right there could be. Who would decide that? The family leader. So Jan, who's a family leader, all of this being decided by the family leader, and he has no idea, right? He has no idea. That's madness. Would other students be expected to report a blackout violation? And he said yes. How do students know that they're expected to report blackout violations? I told you, table topic. This is crazy. How did students know that they were expected to report blackout violations? Jan says it was simply part of the experience of being at the family. You got that right. You got that right. That's crazy. Hold on one second. Hold on, y'all. Get out of here. Hold on, I'm sorry. One of my good friends' dads in the hospital. I'm trying to read. Hold on. I'm trying to read what's going on. Wait, what? What? Hold on, y'all. Hold on. Hold on. I might have to continue this. Oh my goodness. Did I read that right? I'm sorry, y'all. Give me a second. Did I read that right? Hold on a second. I might have to bookmark it. I think that my good friend's dad just died. All right, guys. I gotta reschedule. I'll bookmark where I am, and I will continue. I'll continue here at another time. Yeah, I'm gonna go and call her. I'll figure it out. I know I have work the rest of the week, but I'll figure it out. I hope that everybody has a good day. I'll save it so that I know where I was at, and everybody try to stay sane. Fuck. Where's